figure in the peer-reviewed literature, that original Qantas report needs to be entirely disqualified, and if anybody uses it, they're using bad data. And furthermore, it should be illegal for white oak pastures to continue making claims that their beef is carbon negative and using graphics like these. Anyway, continuing on that 20-year time frame, that seems to be especially important when we look at what is called soil carbon saturation. Simply put, this is when the soil's carbon tank becomes full under the current type of system. So the soil's been fully saturated with carbon in terms of a grazing system, for example. Well, the documentaries will never go into this. The one seemingly unbiased thing that these two reports did in 2020 and 2019 were that they actually mentioned that this was occurring, and they go as far as to say that the slowing rate of sequestration, quote, may suggest a peak soil carbon accumulation at approximately 13 years, at which point they would just go back to spewing methane and the operational fossil fuels and not be storing anything else. Imagine how ridiculous it would be to promote a new special type of solar panel that after just 13 years starts burning coal. It's also worth noting they put a linear line on their soil carbon storage chart, but the dots look more like that hockey stick that is classic to a soil saturation chart. That's a much more realistic fit. So when we're talking about methane over a 15-year, even 13-year window, it becomes even worse because we're talking about the range of 100 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as CO2. You can start to see that this is not the best way to fight climate change. And you might have to ask, why does the soil become saturated? Why does this stop? And one likely reason is that because you have animals constantly grazing over this land, the grass is never getting more than about 2 feet high. The roots are not going to be getting super deep. Compare that to something like native big blue stem grass, which gets about 8 feet high with roots that go 12 feet deep. Or of course, trees with roots that can go like 100 feet deep. But it could be even worse because it's possible that we are undercounting methane in these ruminant systems even more. Here's Tushar.
So there's a really good paper called Underestimates of U.S. Emissions and Global Implications for Industrializing Animal Agriculture by Professor Matthew Hayek. Now, he's published this paper, and it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, but I think I've communicated with him, and I think that they're planning on getting this data published in a peer-reviewed journal. The calculations for methane from animal agriculture are what he considers bottom-up, meaning that they take the cattle and the manure and all the different things they do with the manure, as well as the different feeds for cattle and how long they live, etc. And they calculate that. They calculate the methane emissions based on that. Top-down measurements, for example, if you look at satellite data or from airplanes flying over and using different ways to scan for the methane emissions coming from animal agriculture operations, and other air measurements, generally it seems to exceed the bottom-up calculations.
So we have these standard bottom-up calculations, the ones which I'm guilty of using a lot of the time, where you go, okay, a cow emits this much methane, we're going to multiply that by 1,000 or whatever, and then we have the top-down, which can use imaging techniques to look at the air above the whole system, measure it, and get an estimate from there. The paper says top-down estimates indicate that the total U.S. animal methane emissions are 39 to 90% higher than bottom-up models predict, and that official reports like those by the EPA and in peer-reviewed literature are routinely underestimated. That is huge because you constantly hear the EPA's figure was low, beef is great. The paper says it's unclear why these are so low, throws out a few theories you can read in the link below, but I would love to see this peer-reviewed. Until then, moving on. Now I want to get into land use, which, as Tushar previously mentioned, was 2.5 times the land of a conventional system for this white oak pasture system. And this makes me wonder, what if we tried to adopt this globally? Well, here's Tushar.
Grazing itself uses a quarter of the land's usable surface. The majority of agricultural land is used by grazing, yet it provides only less than 2% of the world's protein.
And yes, that is actually from the FAO. 26% of terrestrial surface on planet Earth is used for grazing, specifically. Add feed land, and globally 38% of our habitable land is used for livestock, so that 2.5 times would get this to about 96% of our habitable land, which is insane. Complete global adoption of this would cause food system collapse, probably. So it appears the question is, how much land do we have to throw in the operation to dilute the methane that is spewed by these cows. Is it like 1 cow per 3 acres, 4 acres, 5? You might as well just be buying carbon offsets at this point. All right, now I want to whip through a couple final topics, and one is the economic argument. I hear a lot that we need to have money coming in, a ton of money coming in, to be doing more sustainable farming, and beef is the way to pay for that because people will pay a lot of money for beef. And there's a bit of a paradox here. First of all, because this is a specialty product, this specialty eco beef fetches a higher price, so you can do things like pay for 2.5 times as much land, etc., or other intensive techniques. But as you scale this, which they say is necessary to achieve the results they want, then all of a sudden you're going to have a higher supply. This stuff is going to be worth less. So as more of this special eco cow flesh enters the market, you're going to have a harder time competing with conventional farms in terms of paying for all the extra labor and land and intensive stuff. You get the point there. And the other economic issue here is ignoring the fact that you can sequester carbon while getting an income from growing plants. And that brings me to regenerative agriculture that uses plants, because yes, regenerative agriculture is a very real thing.
But there's also conservation plant agriculture, where you